Zaren Vell ducked under the low beam of the shuttle bay as the hatch hissed closed behind him. The air smelled like ozone and burnt plastic, which wasn't unusual for a loading dock on board a trade vessel, especially one retrofitted by 3 different species with conflicting engineering standards. He scratched the back of his hand absently where a jagged gash from a snapped conduit cable was already crusting with dried blood. "Zaren, you're dripping on the manifest tablet," said a nasally voice from below. A squat figure with lavender skin and one massive eye waddled toward him, holding up a scanner. "It's not that bad," Zaren muttered and wiped his hand on his pants, which were already streaked with grime. "Just a scratch." "That's not a scratch," the alien replied, scanning Zaren's hand with a frown. "That's a partial dermal rupture with subdermal exposure. You need treatment before the flesh-rot spores find a home." Zaren sighed. "CERN, I've been patching systems and dodging plasma leaks for 6 hours. I'm not about to sit in medbay for another 3 while some tentacled intern stares at me like I'm made of jelly." CERN made a squeaking noise that might have been offense. "You're lucky I'm not the one who files the incident reports anymore. Go see Dr. Arvix. Now." Zaren didn't argue further. His hand did throb a little more than it should. The cut had gone deeper than he thought, and the edges weren't clean. Still, protocol on the cargo hauler Luvidra was loose at best, and most minor injuries were handled with a stiff drink and a few curses. The medbay was 2 decks up past the hydroponic troughs and the rec room that doubled as a mess hall. Zaren pushed the door open and stepped into the harsh white lighting of the ship's clinic. It was too clean, too quiet. Dr. Arvix turned from a console. He was tall, thin, and vaguely amphibious. His skin was a dull green, his eyes dark and unblinking. He moved with the calm precision of someone who had spent decades slicing open creatures of all species and sizes. "You are bleeding," Arvix said, voice flat as he approached. "Sit." Zaren sat on the edge of the exam table, holding out his hand. Arvix examined the wound, his long fingers moving quickly but gently. "This is contaminated," Arvix said. "Fiber from your garment embedded in the tissue. The wound must be flushed, closed, and treated with anti-infectant infusion." "I just need it cleaned," Zaren replied. "I'll pour some ethanol on it, wrap it, and be good by morning." Arvix's gaze didn't shift. "No. The local flora on this ship is non-terrestrial. There are spores in the air you cannot detect. They will colonize that wound. You will develop a septic infection within 20 hours. Possibly less." "I've had worse," Zaren muttered. Arvix blinked slowly. "You will not survive this if untreated." Zaren stood. "Appreciate the concern, Doc, but I've got ethanol in my cabin that'd strip paint from a shuttle hull. I'll handle it." "You must not." "Thanks, Arvix. I'll check in tomorrow." Without waiting for a reply, Zaren left the medbay and made his way to his quarters. The corridor lights flickered overhead, and the hum of the engines vibrated faintly through the floor. In his cabin, Zaren rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a bottle of clear, unlabeled liquid. He twisted the cap off, sniffed, then winced. "Yeah," he muttered to himself. "This'll do." He poured the alcohol directly over the wound. It stung like hell. He bit down on his sleeve to muffle a yell as the liquid seared into the gash, bubbling slightly. His skin went pale around the cut, and his whole arm tingled. Zaren wrapped a clean cloth around it, tied it tightly, and slumped into his bunk. His head throbbed with fatigue. He didn't even remember falling asleep. He woke up shivering. His sheets were soaked with sweat, and his arm pulsed with a deep, aching heat. He sat up slowly, peeled back the cloth, and stared. The skin around the wound had turned a mottled gray. Veins near the injury were darkening, snaking up his forearm in angry lines. He tried to flex his fingers. 2 of them barely moved. "Shit!" He stood, stumbled, and caught himself on the wall. His legs felt weak, his breath shallow. The corridor outside his room spun slightly as he stepped into it, gripping the wall for stability. The medbay door slid open automatically as he staggered toward it. Arvix looked up from a tray of instruments and froze. "You disobeyed medical directive." Arvix said. Zaren collapsed into the chair by the scanner. Yeah, well, you were right. Arvix didn't speak as he moved forward, scanning the wound again. The display lit up with red warnings. Arvix's movements became faster, sharper. You introduced industrial-grade ethanol into an open dermal rupture. You have caused extensive tissue necrosis. The infection has entered the bloodstream. Immediate intervention is required. Just fix it, Zaren mumbled. Arvix activated a restraint harness around Zaren's chest and arms. A mechanical arm descended from the ceiling, injecting a cocktail of drugs into Zaren's neck. He barely felt it. The next few hours were a blur of lights, voices, and pain. Arvix performed a debridement, removing the dead tissue while Zaren drifted in and out of consciousness. The alien muttered to himself in his own language, occasionally pausing to inject more antibiotics. When Zaren woke again, the room was dim. His arm was wrapped in a translucent dressing, connected to a slow drip for. Arvix sat nearby, watching him without blinking. You will survive, the alien said. Zaren's mouth was dry. That bad, huh? You were 6 hours from systemic collapse. Zaren closed his eyes. Could have just said, I told you so. I am not interested in vengeance. Only health. A week passed before Zaren could walk steadily again. The infection had left his arm weak and he lost partial sensation in 2 fingers. Arvix insisted on daily checkups, which Zaren didn't argue with this time. You have remarkable resilience, Arvix said one morning as he scanned Zaren's arm. Humans are stubborn. Sometimes that's all we've got. Arvix nodded once. Stubbornness is not a substitute for medicine. Zaren chuckled, then winced. Lesson learned. Later that day, he returned to the maintenance bay, moving slower than before. CERN looked up from a diagnostics panel. You look like a half-cooked gelatin mold. Feel like one, too. You gonna listen to Arvix next time? Zaren glanced down at his healing arm. Yeah. Next time I'll let the doctor do the doctoring. CERN grunted. Good. Otherwise, I'd have to start learning human medicine, and I don't like touching blood that clots. A few days later, the Luvidra docked at a neutral station orbiting a gas giant. Zaren was cleared for light duty, and he spent most of his time supervising the repair crews rather than crawling into the ducts himself. Arvix came by the cargo bay once before departure. He handed Zaren a small vial. Antimicrobial gel. Use if you ever injure yourself again. Zaren took it. Thanks. I will. Arvix paused. You were fortunate. But next time, fortune may not intervene. No next time, Zaren said. Promise. The alien gave a single nod and turned away. Zaren slipped the vial into his jacket pocket and went back to work, his arm still stiff but usable. The scar on his hand served as a reminder every time he flexed his fingers. He never used that ethanol again. Zaren's boots scuffed against the grated floor of Subdeck C as he limped toward the auxiliary coolant chamber, a place unofficially known by the crew as the freezer pit. The name was optimistic. The temperature regulation systems had been half-functional since the last orbital slingshot, and the coolant mist that hissed from the cracked valves made the air hazy and bitter. He adjusted the thick work glove on his good hand and ducked beneath a drooping pipe, steam curling around his shoulders. Hey, human, a voice rasped from above the coolant tank. You're not cleared for heavy-duty repairs yet. Zaren craned his neck. A pair of angular eyes blinked down from a maintenance perch. The technician's skin shimmered like wet obsidian, and transparent membranes blinked sideways over her eyes. Just supervising, Zaren called up. I've got a clipboard. That makes me management. The alien technician dropped down with a thud that echoed through the frigid chamber. She stood nearly a head taller than Zaren, her chest plate marked with a faded symbol indicating she was from the Drelethi system. She crossed her arms, 4 of them, and sniffed. You smell like fermented starch and old gauze. I've been on bed rest, Zaren replied. It's not a fashion show. She jabbed a thumb toward the coolant regulator. Units fluctuating pressure again. We're losing vapor seal integrity every 4 minutes. You gotta fix clipboard, man. Zaren stepped closer to the control panel, resting his unbandaged hand on the edge. He tapped a few keys, watching the pressure graph spike and stutter. Seal's not the issue, he said after a moment. The pressure valve's cycling too fast because the regulator's timing crystal is drifting. Probably thermal fatigue. You can swap the valve all day and it'll keep doing this. The Drelithy technician tilted her head. How do you know that without a diagnostic run? Because I already tried replacing the valve last cycle. Her nostrils flared. You interfered with the system without consulting engineering? I was bleeding at the time, Zaren muttered. Long story. She reached into a tool pouch and handed him a crystal the size of a fingernail. Here. Replace it. Zaren hesitated. His fingers were stiff and the fine motor control in his injured hand hadn't returned fully. He stared at the crystal, then at the narrow slot behind the regulator housing. I can't grip small tools yet, he admitted. You'll have to do it. She took the crystal back, crouched by the panel, and popped the casing loose with a flick of her wrist. Her secondary arms unfolded and began their work with mechanical precision. You humans are fragile, she said while working. You break easily and you heal unevenly. Maybe, Zaren said. But we get creative. The panel beeped twice. She stood. System stable, she said. For now. Zaren nodded and made a note on his tablet. Thanks, Rylix, she said. Systems technician, level 3. Zaren, he replied. Walking cautionary tale. Rylix gave a low chirp in response and disappeared into a tunnel without another word. Later that cycle, around what passed for evening aboard the Luvidra, Zaren sat in the galley poking at a bowl of rehydrated stew. The lights buzzed overhead and the table vibrated slightly with each pulse of the ship's gravity stabilizers. Across from him, a pair of Ornic traders were quietly arguing over the nutritional compatibility of spiced fungus paste. Arvix entered the galley without fanfare and stopped beside Zaren's table. You are overdue for neural conductivity testing, he said. Zaren set his spoon down. I've got full sensation in my fingertips again. Arvix leaned closer. You said that 3 days ago. I recalibrated the scanner. Your statements are unreliable. Zaren pushed his bowl aside. Fine. Let's go. In the medbay, Arvix attached a series of small sensors along Zaren's forearm and wrist, each one emitting a faint green glow. He tapped a console and motioned for Zaren to flex his fingers. The screen flickered with a waveform as Zaren complied. You have regained 81% function, Arvix said. Not optimal, but acceptable. Can't argue with progress. Arvix removed the sensors and rotated Zaren's arm gently, observing the tendon tension. Your species relies heavily on improvisation in place of caution. Zaren shrugged. We do what works. Until it fails. Yeah, Zaren said. Then we do something else. Arvix walked to a cabinet and returned with a narrow tube. Pain. Only when I think about it. The doctor applied a thin layer of gel to Zaren's wrist. It tingled cold. Zaren didn't flinch. You do not react to discomfort as most species do, Arvix said. We've had some practice. Arvix's long fingers paused. You dissolved live tissue with ethanol and then restrained your immune collapse through sheer will. That is not practice. That is pathology. Zaren chuckled. You ever met a human mechanic over 30? We're all walking pathologies. Arvix placed the tube back into storage. Your physiology is both maddening and informative. I'm flattered. A soft chime sounded from the console. Arvix glanced at it, then turned back. There is a symposium in 4 rotations. Medics from 3 sectors will attend. I am submitting your case as an example of species-specific trauma response. You're making me a case study? You already are one. Zaren swung his legs off the table and stood. At least give me a pseudonym. Arvix blinked. I already submitted it under subject. Human Z. Vell. Zaren sighed. You're not great at the anonymity thing, are you? No, he left the medbay and returned to his quarters. The overhead lights had dimmed to rest cycle levels, and most of the crew were either asleep or plugged into their entertainment feeds. Zaren sat on the edge of his bunk and flexed his hand again. It moved stiffly, but the numbness was almost gone. The next morning, he was summoned to the command deck by Captain Arvix, a bulbous, featherless avian with a lopsided gait and a tendency to overuse the ship-wide voice system. She was tapping a claw against a datapad when Zaren arrived. "You nearly died," she said without preamble. "I'm aware. And now you want to return to conduit detail? I'm cleared for light duty." She exhaled through her beak. "Your replacement has already been assigned. I'm not pulling them off shift so you can crawl into ducks again. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking to be useful." Arvix tilted her head. "Do you know what your medical file says now?" "No, but I bet it's thick. Subject exhibits high pain tolerance, low regard for protocol, and dangerous self-treatment tendencies." Zaren folded his arms. "That's not inaccurate. I don't like dangerous tendencies on my ship. I've learned my lesson." Arvix narrowed her eyes. "If I approve your return to maintenance, you will report every injury, no matter how minor. You will follow Arvix's orders without deviation. And if you so much as look at a bottle of ethanol with intent, I'll jettison it and you into vacuum." Zaren nodded. "Understood." She tossed him a new access badge. "Welcome back, Vell. Try not to explode." As he left the bridge, he passed a trio of engineers arguing in a mix of dialects over a junction schematic. One of them, a pale-skinned Nyorian, glanced up. "Hey, you're the one who poured rocket wash into your armhole, right?" Zaren didn't break stride. "It was medicinal." The Nyorian cackled behind him. Back in the maintenance bay, Rylix was already halfway inside an open panel, two of her hands gripping a conduit while the others adjusted wiring. She looked up as Zaren approached. "I thought you were grounded. Paroled for good behavior." She handed him a spanner. "Then earn your keep." Zaren took the tool and knelt beside her, the ache in his arm a dull reminder of what not to do. As they worked, he caught her watching his movements. "What?" he asked. "You humans keep surviving things you shouldn't. Bad habit." She nodded. "Annoying trait, but useful." They returned to the tangled mess of wires in silence, two technicians from distant stars, both too stubborn to quit, carving order from chaos in the belly of a ship that wheezed and groaned and kept flying anyway. The coolant chamber reeked of ionized metal and burnt lubricant. Zaren's shirt clung to his back, damp from the coolant fog that settled like dew on everything. He crouched beside an exposed pipe junction, holding a thermal reader that flickered with inconsistent digits. Rylix's upper limbs gripped the ceiling rail while her lower pair manipulated a solder wand with mechanical steadiness. "Pressure's oscillating again," Zaren said, tapping the reader against the pipe. "We're getting spikes every 20 seconds. Secondary clamps warped." "I told engineering it wouldn't hold," Rylix muttered, not looking down. "They used alloy meant for food storage bays. It flexes under cyclical heat." Zaren stood, squinting up at the clamp buried behind a tangle of cables and steam-etched tubing. "I'll wedge a temporary brace. Give me a minute. You'll need to climb for it. Obviously." He grabbed the side supports and hoisted himself up, biting down a grunt as his left arm twinged. The scar tissue pulled tight across his wrist, a dull reminder that his hand still wasn't back to full strength. He wedged his boots into the frame and reached for the clamp. The pipe hissed softly beneath his touch. Zaren slid a carbon strut into place and locked it with a twist of his multi-tool. As he descended, one of Rylix's feet nudged a wrench off the ledge. It dropped. Zaren caught it mid-fall, barely, the momentum jarring his arm. "You're not cleared to react that fast," Rylix said, blinking one eyelid at a time. "Reflexes don't care about medical memos." He tossed the wrench back up to her. She caught it without comment and resumed sealing the housing. Below, the thermal reader stabilized to a steady green pulse. They finished the rest of the inspection in silence, returning to the lift platform when the chamber began to cycle fresh coolant through the lines. The sudden drop in temperature made Zaren's teeth ache. Back in the corridor, he leaned against the wall, rotating his wrist slowly. You're still favoring that arm, Rylix noted. Favoring's generous. It sulks unless I bribe it. Muscle atrophy? Some. Nerve recovery's slower than expected. You regenerate strangely. Fast clotting, slow healing. I'm a mess of contradictions. You're a hazard. He chuckled, then winced. Fair. Her pupils narrowed slightly. Why didn't you report the re-injury after the ethanol incident? I didn't re-injure anything. Just strained at catching that wrench. Unreported strain is still medical data. Do you file weekly updates every time your third shoulder clicks? No, because my shoulders are not recovering from necrosis. He lifted his hands in surrender. All right, I'll tell Arvix. You'll tell him now. 10 minutes later, Arvix scanned Zaren's arm again, his expression unreadable as usual. You must cease unnecessary exertion, he said. It wasn't unnecessary. It was a wrench. You caught it with a compromised limb. Would you prefer I let it hit the coolant processor and crack the casing? You must inform me of all setbacks. Even minor. I didn't think it counted as a setback. Arvix's fingers hovered near the scanner. Your judgment is unreliable. Zaren raised an eyebrow. That's harsh. That's accurate. He rolled his sleeve back down as Arvix applied a dermal stim patch just below the scar. It pulsed against his skin, sending a mild electric buzz through his forearm. You will return tomorrow for motor function calibration. Got it. As he stepped out, the door whispered shut behind him. The corridor lights dimmed slightly, shift change. He made his way toward the auxiliary mess where the galley bots had just started their second cycle meal prep. The room was warm, filled with the faint scent of roasted kelp and synthetic grain. Zaren grabbed a tray, loaded it with something that looked like meat but wasn't, and sat near the viewport. Stars drifted past in slow arcs. Across the table, a translucent-skinned Purithian was chewing something that fizzed audibly with every bite. She glanced at Zaren's bandaged arm. You're the one who sterilized an open wound with ethanol, she said. I have limited options. That's what the last human said before he tried to cauterize his leg with a plasma torch. Did it work? He passed out and set off the fire suppression system. Zaren stabbed at his food, unsure if it was meant to be eaten hot or cold. We don't do things by halves. Clearly. She stood, her tray already empty, and gave him a polite nod. Try not to invent any new procedures. I'm done with innovation. The rest of the cycle passed uneventfully. No pressure spikes, no coolant leaks, no tools flung from great heights. Just routine maintenance, sensor recalibrations, and the occasional misaligned hatch to realign. By rest cycle, Zaren's arm ached again. He removed the stim patch and stretched his fingers one by one, watching how each responded. The ring finger was slower than the rest. He noted it mentally. The next day, Arvix ran the calibration routine. Grip strength is at 70% baseline. Response lag has reduced. Sensory feedback matches expected stabilization. Zaren tilted his head. So it's healing. Gradually, but not symmetrically. He flexed his hand again. Any permanent damage? Minor nerve dulling. You will notice it most in cold environments or under sustained strain. That's manageable. You should continue physical therapy until full restoration. I can do that. Arvix paused. You are not a typical human. I've been told. You adapted to infection with minimal resources, endured systemic inflammation without sedation, and stabilized after tissue necrosis without surgical intervention. Zaren shrugged. Never saw the appeal of sedation. Most species do not endure pain without reaction. You ever seen a human stub their toe? Arvix blinked. Yes. It involved shouting and destruction of furniture. Exactly. He left the med bay and returned to the maintenance bay where Rylix was overseeing a plasma conduit replacement. She gestured toward the exposed panel. Want to test that grip strength? Zaren stepped in, twisted the conduit into place, and held it steady while she sealed the ends. No tremor, she observed. Feels almost normal. She handed him a scanner. Let's see if your fingers remember how to calibrate sensors. They worked through the next 2 hours without incident. Data scrolled across the reader, and Zaren's hand didn't cramp once. At one point, he even caught a dropped bolt midair without pain. After finalizing the readings, Rylix handed him a maintenance log to sign. "You're cleared for full duty." "Good. I was tired of pretending to supervise." "You'll still break something." "Probably." She tilted her head. "But this time you'll report it?" Without hesitation. She gave a low trill, almost like amusement. "Then maybe you'll survive another cycle." By the next rotation, his grip was back to full strength. The patchwork scar on his wrist had faded to a dull pink. No more numbness. No more stiffness. Just a faint reminder of a decision made in desperation. He never touched the bottle of ethanol again. And every time he passed Mebe, he gave Arvix a nod that said, "Message received."